that is the very acute issue, and particularly this week the president of Ukraine will travel to the United States, to the UN General Assembly. He will meet US President Trump, but also there would be issue of creating the peacekeeping operation here in the Ukrainian Donbas. It has really become the issue. I would also explain the issue was raised a couple of years ago, but I can confirm that it had become serious. So the high-level politician, I'm speaking on that, will provide those details within the next minutes. But where is the story is that now the controversy is over where to have this peacekeeping mission, either on the contact line, that is the Russian proposal at the moment, and then it would mean that this separatist territory kind of Ukraine accept that it's not its part. And Ukraine definitely wants that there would be full control over this territory, and if the UN is getting involved, we definitely have the people there. So I probably would start with the comment of the Ukrainian Minister for Foreign Affairs, who really explain what they would like to put on table.
The mandate of such a peacekeeping mission should involve the removal of Russian forces from the occupied territory of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region and should eliminate all troops, mercenaries, and military equipment brought into this area by Russia. And the first steps to achieving stabilization and a return to normalcy include, for example, disarmament. Who is going to take care of this? It obviously won't be just Russia's mission. Consultations are now taking place about the OSCE's responsibility in this mission. I met with the Secretary General of the OSCE and will meet with him again in New York. And also about the direction of the peacekeeping mission. The purpose of this is to establish an effective period that will lead up to elections in the Donbas. And obviously nobody will agree that Russia should have full control of structuring and carrying out the electoral process. What we are going to discuss in the Security Council, the first resolution on a UN peacekeeping mission in the Donbas, will be what diplomats refer to as technical. It can be a push for the Secretary General, and there will be meetings with the Secretary General in New York to send out the mission to the region and to outline what the results of such a mission should be. And then the mission returns and we discuss the mandate. It's important to understand that according to the first resolution, a detailed mandate does not yet exist. And this process won't include just one resolution. Journalists and others often ask, will the first resolution determine everything? It won't, as it never does. The presence of the aggressor, Russia, in this mission is just a crazy thing. How can Russia, the country that occupied the Donbas territory, be present in this mission? First of all, I can't speak on behalf of the President of the United States on what he will bring up during the meeting, but we will definitely discuss the situation in the occupied Donbas. We will discuss common tactics, which we already discussed with Kurt Volker. We will certainly talk about security cooperation, and we will talk about the U.S.'s support for Ukraine's reforms.
Well, I think that this is very interesting. I mean, the idea of a peacekeeping force in fact seems to me, to be honest, an expression, if the Russians are indeed serious, an expression that they have not achieved their goals in the eastern Donbass. I think, you know, we have this view that Russians are chess-playing grandmasters thinking 20 moves ahead, when, as I've seen from my time in Donbass, in Luhansk, Donetsk, Lubyansk, around Debaltseve, it's not quite the case, and I've also seen it with their propaganda. Now, I think, you know, in a way, if Russia is serious about this, it's a way of essentially trying to extricate itself from the situation without losing face. So it can look like the good guys saying we'll put in UN peacekeepers because, you know, there are quote-unquote separatists, even though when I was in, I was there in April 2014, and I was in Donetsk on the second night that they stormed the building, and there must have been 200 people there, in a city of, what, 1 million? During the Iranian Revolution, 8 million people came out onto the streets. So, you know, I mean, there wasn't a huge amount of support for the separatists that I saw anyway. You know, pro-Russia, the sentiment, yes, that was slightly different. But I think this is very interesting. I think that it means that Russia is essentially accepted that it's not going to get its way in Ukraine. It's pouring resources into Ukraine. It doesn't have the money. It's got a declining economy. The price of oil is very low. Putin needs a face-saving exercise. This could be it. It could be good for Ukraine. I expect there to be a lot of squabbling over sovereignty and borders. But for the moment, I think I see it as a sign of Russian, the Russians saying, okay, hey, we've run out of ideas.
So are Russians serious? This is the question which is asked by everybody. Kurt Volker, who had been who has become the U.S. special envoy on Ukraine negotiations, that's how it's named, is the person to know. So we ask the questions him, and in particular provide this comment for you that from that diplomatic answer you would probably read. How do you feel? Is it serious or not? Are this issue really on table?
We've seen a conflict here for 3 years. The Minsk negotiations had been getting stuck. That there was a circular discussion about security and political implementation, and nothing was happening. The ceasefire was never being implemented. People were dying, a couple people a week would die. So getting out of that cycle of failure, basically, getting out of that, let's not call it a failure, but stagnation. Getting out of that cycle of stagnation is important. A peacekeeping force, if there were one, that had responsibility for the area, instead of Russian forces being there occupying the area, could be a way to provide security for people and provide access for Ukrainian authorities, to provide a space where you can have elections, a space where you can see the implementation of the Minsk agreements. So that's the idea behind a peacekeeping force. It's very interesting that Russia proposed a UN protection force in New York. Up until that point, Russia had not been bringing this up in New York, and in fact it said it didn't like the idea of the UN. So this is a step forward in a way, bringing it up for discussion and bringing it to the Security Council. Now, the terms of the mandate that Russia has proposed, I am concerned, would only deepen the division in Ukraine. It would be along the line of the ceasefire, not throughout the whole area. It would only protect monitors, not people. It would not give access to controlling the Russia-Ukraine border. So there's a lot of obstacles, a lot of problems with the way it was proposed. But it opens a discussion. And I hope that through that dialogue we can talk about the idea of a genuine peacekeeping force, and one that would be focused on security throughout the entire area, one that would control the Ukrainian side of the Ukraine-Russia border, and one that would provide for the cantonment and monitoring of heavy weapons. If we do that, I think it meets all of the other conditions and allows for a political process to go forward. We're not producing our own document. There is a proposal by Russia. It is as I described. It doesn't do everything that it needs to do to bring the country together. It would actually deepen the divide. A peacekeeping force that has area security responsibility, that provides for the cantonment and monitoring of heavy weapons, and that's control of the Ukrainian side of the Ukraine-Russia border. Russia proposed this idea in New York. We're on the Security Council, Ukraine's on the Security Council, France, Germany, Japan, Sweden, others. We are talking about this. We'll talk about this in New York next week. I'll have a further bilateral meeting with my Russian counterpart sometime in October. So there will be dialogue about this. It's more important at this stage to get the principles right. I think it would be unreasonable to expect Russia to go to the United Nations and propose our position. And they're not going to do that. They're going to go in and say, here's what Russia would love to see. But the fact that they did this, I think, is very interesting and should be taken seriously. They weren't talking about this in New York before. They weren't talking about a UN force before. That's now on the table as a Russian proposal. So I think that's very interesting. And I think the way we get to these questions of mandate and scope is to sit down with the Russians and talk it through. The issues driving this are not paper negotiations in New York. The issues driving it are Russia's sense that the status quo is not good for anybody. It's not good for Russia. It's not good for the people of the Donbas. It's not good for Ukraine. And if we can find a better way forward, let's work to do that. So that's how I think we get to reshaping those discussions about the mandate. We see sanctions. We see questions about security assistance for Ukraine. We see clarity, just concern and clarity of information about Russia's role in all of this. President Trump telling President Putin that the U.S.-Russia relationship will not be getting better as long as this issue is not resolved. The worsening diplomatic climate between the U.S. and Russia for other reasons, our embassies and consulates and personnel. So there's a sense that we need to start finding things to build on. So I think all of those things come together to create a climate in which it's actually worth trying to solve this. Maybe one other thing I would add is I think Russia is realizing that its invasion and occupation of part of Ukraine has resulted in a Ukraine that is more unified, more nationalist, more westward-looking, more anti-Russian than before. And this is clearly not something Russia intended, and I think it's having to think through how would it like to recalibrate. The topic of my conversations with Mr. Surkov are the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and safety and security for all Ukrainian citizens, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, or religion. That's what the goal is. And I think that Russia, on paper, subscribes to those goals. The Minsk process says it's restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Russia itself talks about the importance of safety for Russian-speaking people. So what we need to talk about is how to do it. We got into this circular discussion in the Normandy and Minsk process. What comes first, security or political process? I'm hoping we can break out of that circular argument. If we did have a peacekeeping force, as we were just discussing, that could create time and space for moving forward on the political steps under Minsk. Ukraine does have responsibilities agreed to under the Minsk agreements about, for instance, elections, about special status, about amnesty, things that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian parliament already passed in the past. And I understand that it can't be implemented when Ukraine can't even access this territory. But if we can change this discussion, we have security in the area, we have access into those areas, then Ukraine will have to follow through on those things too, as it said it would. I don't have any doubt about it. I just recognize it couldn't happen until now, or until there is security. But once we have that, I think that would be the follow-through.
Another issue which Volker said that he answered on the question on Crimea, that it's a separate issue, but there is no compromise on that. So because there are those rumors, and maybe the Crimea would be the bargain. But still, you see this firm position of the UN Special Envoy, yet Donald Trump is in the White House, and a lot of people still think, you know, doesn't matter that you have Pentagon head, the State Secretary, it's still unpredictable.
Look, you said it, unpredictable. I mean, who knows? Donald Trump, he contradicts himself, not even weekly, daily, hourly. You know, he'll tweet one thing 1 hour, he'll tweet another thing the next hour. Who knows? I mean, he has talked tough on Ukraine. He's talked, you know, he has said that, you know, if Russia doesn't behave, he will do X, Y, Z on Ukraine. But in the end of the day, this is Donald Trump. And you cannot predict this man. You just cannot. From what I hear, you know, he exasperates many of the people around him, a lot of the generals. I mean, you've seen him, you know, I mean, Rex Tillerson had to come out and say the president does not speak for me. I mean, he had to disavow. Can you think of any example of a Secretary of State coming out and disavowing their own president? So this is the thing. You just do not know with Donald Trump. It could be, you know, it could be something as that he has a bad Russian meal for breakfast. You just don't know with Donald
David,
Trump.
Thanks so much for co-hosting this segment with us and making this roundup of the reforms and the security agenda and foreign relations.